The temperature displayed on the electronic clock mounted in front of the abandoned gas station read -52 degrees Celsius. The red digits blinked slowly, almost laboriously, as if even they were exhausted, struggling to hold on to the last flicker of life in this skin-splitting cold. At that temperature, everything becomes impossibly fragile. Plastic hardens like thin porcelain, ready to shatter at the slightest impact. Metal contracts and emits faint, dry cracks, like bones snapping in the dark. And your breath no longer rises. It falls straight down in front of your face, freezing into glittering white dust that catches the weak beam of your flashlight. I stood at the ragged edge of a sparse settlement only a few kilometers from Oymyakon, the name that always comes up when anyone wants to name the coldest permanently inhabited place on Earth. But I had not come here to chase records. I was not here to pose for a selfie next to the marker that reads -71.2 degrees Celsius. I had no interest in folk tales of cold that kills. I came for one wooden house. The house stands completely isolated from the rest of the village, nearly a full kilometer away, far enough that once night falls, the faint yellow glow from the other homes disappears entirely behind the white horizon. No fence, no barbed wire, no warning sign. The front door is only half closed, hinges rusted. Yet for decades, almost no one from the surrounding hamlets has been willing to spend a single night inside. They do not speak of ghosts. They do not whisper about wandering spirits. They simply shake their heads, voices dropping low, and say the same single sentence. There, people make the wrong decisions. At first I thought it was just another roundabout Siberian way of saying the cold kills judgment. But the more I learned, the more I realized that sentence carried far greater weight. It was not about temperature. It was about something inside us. The house was built in the late 1930s, back when winter survey and supply convoys regularly crawled through this region to resupply even more remote stations. The dirt track beside it later became part of the Kolyma Highway, a road people call the Road of Death, not because of campfire legends, but because the number of people who vanished along it is too large for anyone to want an exact count. In the village archive, a worn notebook kept behind glass in the local administration office, there is a brief entry from 1947. 3 men from a route inspection team stopped for the night at the house. The next morning, only one walked out. The other 2 were found less than 10 meters from the front door. They lay face down in the snow, bodies rigid, eyes still open. No wounds, no signs of a struggle, not a drop of blood. Only one detail that the whole village repeated for years. The front door stood slightly ajar. The rear window had been forced upward, even though the outside temperature was below -50 degrees Celsius. The sole survivor, a surveyor named Victor, gave a very short statement before being evacuated for treatment. Around midnight, we all felt suffocated. Abnormally hot, as though the stove were roaring when in reality only a few sticks of wood remained. Today, medicine calls this paradoxical undressing, a cruel final trick the brain plays in the late stages of hypothermia, when severe oxygen deprivation creates an overwhelming sensation of heat, causing victims to tear off clothing and open windows or doors to cool down. But in 1947, that term barely existed in public knowledge. To the people who first heard the story, there was only one possible explanation for opening a window or door into that killing cold, and it was not one they wanted to say out loud. I still remember the moment I first pushed that wooden door open. The hinges gave a long, dry rasp, like the groan of something very old being forced awake. Inside there was nothing remarkable. An ancient iron stove, 2 torn upholstered chairs, a long wooden table scarred with faint knife marks, and stairs disappearing into pitch-black attic darkness. No musty smell. Only the scent of aged pine mixed with something sharper, cold metal, almost like frost-bitten blood, making the space feel at once confined and strangely hollow. I lit the fire immediately. Here, if the flames die, the indoor temperature can drop 20 degrees in under 2 hours. While the kindling caught, I crouched to examine the floorboards near the front door. There were scratches, not animal claw marks, not drag marks from a collapsing body, just short, shallow diagonal gouges, as though someone had taken frantic, blind steps while a thin glaze of ice was already forming on the wood. The first evening passed with agonizing slowness. Outside, the wind did not howl theatrically like in horror films. It moved steadily, dragging razor-fine snow horizontally across the ground like slow white smoke. The silence here is not the absence of sound. It is thick, heavy silence that makes you hear your own heartbeat too clearly. Close to midnight, I heard the first sound. Not a knock, not footsteps. Just a single, very soft tap, something lightly contacting wood. I froze, still holding a stick of kindling. Listened. Nothing. Then it came again, clearer this time. Right against the front door. In an environment like this, the brain does not think the way it does in normal places. It runs endless worst-case simulations. Polar bear gone off course, starving wolf, lost traveler, ice shard flung by wind. But the most frightening thing is that your pulse races before your conscious mind even names the fear. I picked up the flashlight. The metal grip burned through both layers of glove. When I cracked the door open, the cold struck like a physical blade, sharp enough to make my eyes water instantly. On the top step lay a small Arctic fox, curled on its side, already rigid. Frost rimmed every single hair. No blood, no torn fur. It had simply collapsed, perhaps only seconds from reaching the warmth it could smell but could never reach. I stood staring at the tiny body for a long time. 3 steps. Just 3 steps from the door. A living creature had come within arm's reach of the only warmth for kilometers around, and died. I closed the door. The latch clicked with unnatural loudness in the silence. After that moment, every small sound in the house felt personal. The creak of logs contracting in the cold, the faint whistle of wind through window frames, my own heartbeat in my ears. All of them seemed to whisper, "You'll open the door too." The next morning, I set out along the old track toward the main highway. The snow was so deep that each step sank nearly to the knee. Here, if you leave shelter unprepared, your decision-making begins to degrade in 20 to 30 minutes. Brain starves for oxygen. Limbs go numb. Willpower fractures. Archive records from the 1950s are filled with cases of trucks and jeeps found idling beside the road, engines still warm, fuel tanks half full. Drivers discovered hundreds of meters away, sometimes crawling on hands and knees, always facing the same direction, forward toward nothing. Why did they abandon the warm cabin? Why did they walk into blank white eternity? The answer is not supernatural. It is neurological. When temperatures drop below -40 degrees Celsius, peripheral blood vessels constrict violently to protect the core. The brain receives steadily less oxygen. Chronic fatigue compounds. Months of perpetual darkness erode the edges of reality. Very soon you begin to experience hallucinations so subtle they are impossible to distinguish from truth. Distant lights flickering, the low throb of an engine that never arrives, a voice calling your name out of the whiteout. They call it the third man factor in polar exploration literature. Survivors describing the unmistakable sensation of an invisible companion walking beside them, guiding, encouraging, even warming them. Not a ghost, not a religious vision, simply the mind's last emergency subroutine when isolation becomes absolute. But here in Oymyakon, that subroutine becomes a silent killer. If your brain convinces you there is shelter just ahead, you will walk toward it. And when you walk in -50 degrees Celsius wind with no landmarks at all, every direction is identical. White, silent, endless. Late on the second afternoon, returning to the house, I noticed the back door for the first time, a narrow exit onto a small yard now buried under unbroken snow. In the 1947 report, it was the rear window that had been opened. But if someone had left through that back door, the house would have vanished from sight in seconds. I forced the door open. Ice around the edges cracked like gunshots. A solid wall of snow slumped inward. Beyond it, nothing but white, stretching to infinity. Standing in the open frame, I felt an almost physical pull, the vast emptiness pressing back against me, daring me to step forward simply to break the stillness. The second night arrived like a door slamming shut. Temperature kept falling. The stove popped and hissed as wood contracted. Around 2 in the morning, the sound returned. This time, it was not a tap. It was slow, careful footsteps crunching faintly on snow. I did not move at first. I sat frozen, flashlight in hand, heart hammering inside my chest. The footsteps paused, then resumed, then stopped again, directly against the front wall. I told myself, thermal cracking in the snowpack, a stray reindeer, wind, nothing to fear. But my body ignored every rational explanation. Pulse still climbing, cold sweat running down my spine even though the indoor temperature was barely minus 15 degrees Celsius. That is the real terror of this house. No grand event is required to create horror here. The smallest stimulus is enough. The brain amplifies it 100-fold because the surrounding world is so empty, so silent, so deadly. I remembered the words of an old villager named Anatoly when I asked why no one stayed. Daylight makes it an ordinary wooden house. Night turns it into a test. Not a test of courage, a test of whether you can keep your mind from running ahead of reality. Most people fail. On the morning of the third day, I opened the front door. The fox was still there, now even stiffer, encased in a fresh layer of clear ice like glass. Its eyes remained open, staring at nothing. The sight struck harder than any story I had ever read. It reminded me that nature here needs no demons, no supernatural darkness to kill. It only needs time and solitude. But what has kept this house legendary for decades is not the visible deaths. It is what happened inside the minds of those who stayed. In old reports, the same maddening detail repeats. Survivors insisted they heard or saw signs of life outside at night. Distant truck engines, pale headlight beams sweeping across the snow, a tall figure standing hundreds of meters away, waving. Every one of those can be explained scientifically. Superior mirages bending light through ice crystals, wind playing across eaves like a flute, the brain desperately filling silence with phantom signals to fight off total isolation. Yet, when you are alone, and you know that a handful of wrong decisions in the past led others to open a door and freeze to death, the question will not stop echoing in your head. What if this time it's real? That question is the most dangerous thing here. I sat back by the stove, watching the last flames shrink from red to gray. 48 hours. No apparitions, no whispering voices, no impossible lights. Only the cold. Only the silence. And one brutally clear truth. In this environment, the line between reason and panic is thinner than paper. Thinner than the ice glazing the windows. The deaths around this house never needed ghosts to become haunting. They haunt because they prove something merciless. Even with maps, GPS, satellite phones, and every piece of modern knowledge, a single momentary lapse of judgment in minus 50 degrees Celsius is still enough to end everything. When I stepped outside to end the third day, I turned back for one last look. In daylight, the house looked ordinary again, just weathered logs lost in an endless white sea. Nothing frightening, nothing mysterious, but I finally understood why its story refuses to die. Not because something waits in the shadows. I left the house late in the morning of the third day. The sky was perfectly clear, not a single cloud to soften it, but the light here never feels warm. It only sharpens the snow's reflection until everything glitters with a cold, blinding whiteness that makes your eyes ache and your mind feel strangely hollow. The little Arctic fox on the doorstep had become almost entirely ice now. Fur frozen stiff, eyes still open but empty of any last spark. I did not touch it. In this place you learn to respect whatever nature leaves behind. Not out of superstition, but because every small interference carries consequences you cannot foresee. I walked back toward the old track that joins the Colima Highway. When I glanced over my shoulder, the house had already shrunk to a tiny, dark rectangle lost in the white sea. From this distance it looked ordinary again. No menace, no mystery. Yet the farther I moved away, the more certain I became that the real story had never been confined to those 4 wooden walls. The nights I spent inside were only the surface. Beneath them lay something far heavier. In the village I met Sergei, an old truck driver who had spent more than 20 winters hauling cargo along this road. He did not tell stories to frighten. He spoke in the flat, measured tone of a man reading from a technical logbook. "Some nights," he said, staring out the small window at the endless white, "you hear another engine beside your own. Diesel rhythm, close, steady, like someone running parallel in the dark." At first I blamed the wind whistling through gaps in the cab. Later I understood it was my brain filling the silence with something familiar. I asked whether he had ever stopped at the wooden house. He nodded once, slowly. "One time. Winter of '87. Breakdown halfway between here and the next post. Rescue was hours away. I went inside to wait out the night. Not because I believed in ghosts, because I kept feeling I had left something outside. A wrench, a thermos, the chain tension on the right rear tire. The feeling wouldn't let go. I almost opened the door 3 times before dawn. That sensation, forgetting something, what he called the persistent forgetfulness, appeared again and again in every account I collected from drivers, surveyors, and hunters who had passed through this stretch. It is not violent panic. It is not vivid hallucination. It is a quiet, nagging insistence, soft as a half-remembered promise. You just turned off the stove at home, but are you absolutely sure? In a city you can turn around and check. Here every check means opening a door to minus 50 degrees Celsius air. In 1963, a refrigerated cargo truck was found roughly 2 kilometers from the house. Engine dead, but more than half the fuel remained in the tank. The driver lay 400 meters away, curled on his side in the snow, no wounds, no signs of struggle. Medical conclusion: severe hypothermia. What kept the case alive in local memory for decades was not the cause of death. It was the trail of footprints. They did not lead straight toward the village or the highway. They described a wide, lazy curve, almost a circle that never quite closed, as though the man had been trying to circle back to a fixed point he could no longer locate. The prints simply ended. And there he lay down. When I finally obtained a photocopy of the old route log from the district archive, one small entry caught my eye. Before leaving the cab, the driver had scribbled in haste, "Heard metallic impact behind the vehicle. Checking now." No other traffic had been logged that night. No second vehicle reported. No tire tracks overlapping his. At extreme low temperatures, metal contracts rapidly. A steel panel shifting even a millimeter under thermal stress can produce a sharp, echoing clang, like something heavy dropping onto the deck. In darkness and wind, the brain easily inflates that sound into catastrophe. A flat tire, a broken axle, someone tampering with the load. And if you believe the truck is damaged behind you, you step down to look. That afternoon, I returned to the area around the house, this time pushing farther north toward the thin line of stunted forest. The snow here was deeper, finer, almost untouched by animal tracks. Nearly an hour of slow walking later, something made me stop dead. A small curve of rusted metal protruded just above the surface. I cleared the snow carefully with the folding shovel. It was the skeletal frame of an old snowmobile, the kind used by survey teams in the early 1950s. Twisted iron, a few splintered wooden slats still clinging to it. No bodies, no personal effects, only the stripped bones of a machine buried for decades. According to sparse local records, 2 men on a secondary route reconnaissance disappeared in an early 1950s blizzard while riding a snowmobile very much like this one. The vehicle was never located. I cannot prove this is their machine, but its position, less than a kilometer from the house, added another layer of weight to everything I had felt inside those walls. What made them stop here? Had they sought shelter in the cabin? Or had they believed safety lay just ahead and veered off course, only to lose themselves in featureless white? The more data I gathered, the clearer the pattern became. Almost every incident, disappearances, hypothermia deaths, vehicles abandoned with engines warm, clustered within a few kilometers of that single wooden structure. Not because the house caused them, because it was the only unmistakable landmark in a landscape that offered almost none. In orientation psychology, there is a well-documented phenomenon. When humans move through a perfectly uniform environment, desert, open ocean, endless snow, they unconsciously drift into wide, looping curves if no fixed reference points exist. A tiny angular error compounds until you walk in circles without realizing it. Standing alone in that white expanse, I turned a slow 360-degree circle. Every direction was identical. No distinctive tree. No distant ridge breaking the horizon. Only flat, blinding white stretching forever. At night, in blowing snow, if your mind convinces you that you see a faint yellow glow from the house's window, even if it is only moonlight refracted through ice crystals, you will walk toward it. And if the light is not real, you will keep walking. On the evening of the 4th day, I returned to the house for one final night. This time, the purpose was different, to watch my own mind now that it carried the weight of every story I had collected. The difference was immediate and stark. The first night, I had felt only silence. The 4th night, every sound arrived already tagged with memory. Wind striking the wall recalled the 1963 driver's log entry. Snow sliding off the roof echoed the lost snowmobile team.